thanks, James and Charles, for organising such a great event. And firstly, I'd like to say thanks everyone for joining today. So my name's Simon. I'm an account executive based out of London for a company called Salsify. So my talk today is on back to basics, and partly to do with the journey I've gone on over the last kind of 12 years, how I've ended up here, and then more importantly, how honing in on, as James alluded to, of how I've moved actually from leadership into an individual contributor role. So I spent 10 years plus in 12 years in sales, 10 year plus in sales leadership. I was quite fortunate at a young age to move up into leadership, working in Australia and across APAC. And then about 4 years ago, I moved into tech and SaaS. So my last role previous to Salsify was for a tech startup out of Dublin. And I was the sales manager. And anyone in a startup who's a sales manager knows that you're building a team, leading the team, training the team, and recruiting it. But also you need to sell yourself. You need to understand the product. You need to understand the process. It was really, really fun. But due to COVID, and my partner, she lives in London, I made the decision because of COVID to move to London. And that's where I actually was working at Salsify at the time, selling into them. And an account executive role came up. And this leads on to my first point of my talk, which is invest in the future you. So I find myself, that was the second big crossroads in my career where I had to make a decision, and that was quite critical. And as salespeople, we're money hungry, we're always looking for the next thing. It's quite easy to take the short-term gain where you're moving to a leadership role, it's more money, etc. But how does that investment turn out for you 5 years from now, you 10 years from now? So it's really, really important, I feel, to when you're making those key decisions and moments in your life, is to think of that future self and how you can invest in future you to have a better life. What I did when I reflected on that was that, I really wanted to move into a more complex, higher value SaaS product with a larger company. Now, anyone that works in SaaS leadership knows that that's quite difficult because the processes are different. You're in 3 to 12 month sales cycles, and it's a huge step. And what I felt was the future me wouldn't get there unless I went back to basics and did it for myself. I obviously had the experience in the previous role where I had to sell as well. And quite quickly, I was actually one of the top salespeople within that startup also. But I really, really loved it because it let me invest in myself. There's so much you need to learn inside an organization, but also outside. Like Medic by Andy White, Value Selling by Julia Thomas, that's heavily recommended by Gartner, and Gap Selling, Challenger Selling. There's so much you need to learn to be really, really good at SaaS sales and being someone that excels. Is really difficult when you're in a leadership role. So that's my first point, is kind of invest in your future self. You'll find those crossroads really important to make decisions for the long term, not short term. And the next thing goes on. So I stepped into that role. It's about being curious. My VP, James Humphrey, famously said it, I was be Columbo in every situation. So I started, there was a really cool 6-week training process, but actually I spent probably the first 4 months and learning a lot, but I'm still constantly learning and looking to learn new things. And you constantly have to be curious. The reason why I find that is, I got in Salsify, the sales cycles 3 to 12 months, as I said. My first sale didn't come to April. That's really, really tough. But I completely invested in learning, and don't wait for learning opportunities to come on within. When I was moving into Salsify, I had to learn about e-commerce. I knew what e-commerce was, but I had to learn e-commerce. I had to learn how to sell to brand manufacturers. That's our key target. I had to learn a whole new product, and then brush up on really, really rigid processes, as I said, like Medic, Challenger Selling as well. So just engross yourself in learning. What I find is that salespeople at the beginning, and great salespeople in particular, will look to learn everything. They'll study different deals. They'll listen to call after call after call. But when they get to a certain level, they stop. And sometimes they stagnate. And they're thinking, why am I not excelling any further? And it's because you're not learning. If you're not learning, you're not excelling. So I'm a big believer in learning in every single aspect that you can find. And then that even leads to being curious when you're speaking to a prospect. Being curious about every single part of their situation, unpeel the onion to really understand what's going to drive that sale through from a timing perspective and making sure you win the deal. And then that last part leads into the recipe for success. So I'm a big believer in structure. I'm very structure driven. But when I started in Salsify, I knew there was so much I needed to learn that I created things that I did day in, day out religiously, which included aspects of learning, but then also included prospecting for myself. In Salsify, it's key to drive 2 of your own outbound meetings So not from any marketing and full outbound meetings per month. A lot of business I hear not doing that, which I think is crazy. I'm a big believer in outbound, absolutely love it. So that's really, really critical. You're topping up your own pipeline. You're not always reliant on business development, BDRs, SDRs. But find that recipe for success, the things you do day in, day out religiously without fail. And what I've found is the greatest salespeople fail in my career. And I've seen the most greenest salespeople succeed. And what I always find as the common denominator is doing the things you need to do consistently day in, day out. What I find is some great salespeople, and they're really, really absolutely brilliant, but they'll do all the great fundamentals, they'll have that structure and process, they start succeeding, and then they stop doing them. And then suddenly it's the dip. And you will hear about loads of up and downs, and naturally there's ups and downs in sales, but I think there is some things you're in control of to constantly be, every day in, day out prospecting, learning new things, investing in yourself on an ongoing basis will lead you to have not only success, but consistency in success. And that's something I've adopted. So, I went from 0% in Q1, 80% in Q2, 286% in Q3, 246% in Q4, and I'm on track for 200+% this quarter. But it's about that consistency and really, really sticking at it. But it's tough, right? Prospecting is really enjoyable, but again, day in, day out, it does become mundane and you've loads of different things on. So I think my main thing when I step back to basics was, one, make decisions for the long term and the short term, but understand why you're investing in yourself for the long term and see it as investing in yourself. Secondly, it's about being curious. Never stop learning. And then thirdly is find the recipe success. And when you have that recipe and it really works, keep it. Because it's like baking a cake. It's a science. If you change the recipe of the cake and one of the elements, what will happen is the cake will turn out very differently. Could be good, could be bad. But you need to understand when you have a really successful recipe, why it's successful and why you need to do it day in, day out consistently. That's my talk today, but thanks everyone for joining. I'm happy for the Q&A session later.